Thank you so much. Okay, so thanks everyone for being here. It's great to see you again. And what we will do today is, as planned, talk about fiction writing specifically. And I did leave you with a question at the end of last session. I asked you to think about one thing you would like to introduce to your classes, to your English lessons next year. If you did give that any thought and want to share, now would be the time. So did anyone think about one thing related to writing that you would like to introduce next year? Mhm. Yes, Denka.
Uh-huh. Hello.
Hi.
In fact, there is nothing to think about because I'm here in this seminar just to find how to teach writing as effectively as possible. So what I really want to do to introduce into my lessons is a kind of corner or kind of short period of time in which the students will write, because usually what I do is just ask a so-called silly question to make them react. And next year I think I'll alternate it with make a comment about something you have in your mind, in your head, or write about what you saw, what you experienced, who you met, and stuff like that.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. Oh, Christina, yes.
One person in the chat from Bilovec shared crime stories, writing, fixed fairy tales, and mind mapping. That's the plan of Gymnasium Bilovec for next year.
Excellent. Thank you. That's great. And yes, I liked also, Zdenka, this idea of asking kind of off the wall or silly questions just to get students talking. That's great. And crime stories, that's something I haven't taught yet, but that sounds excellent. Very cool. And I see someone with a raised hand. Yes.
Hello, that's me.
Hi.
Okay, so let me introduce. I'm not Tomáš, I'm Martina.
That's what I thought. Okay.
And I'm from Mnichovo Hradiště, Gymnasium Mnichovo Hradiště, and actually I'm a Czech teacher and English teacher, and I use creative writing, especially in my Czech lessons. And because I also write with my students in English, but I wanted to bring something new, and I decided in my Czech lessons, not in English, but it can be useful for English as well, to write a class journal next year because I will teach 13-year-old pupils, and I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, because now I'm burnt out. So I'll think about it at the end of my holidays. But I think maybe, or I may divide them into teams of 4 or 5, and they will write a journal every month where can be anything. I don't know, some survey, comics, a story, anything from. So we will think about it probably at the beginning of the school year. That's it. Okay, just my homework ready.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you, Martina. And I'm glad to hear you're already using creative writing in your Czech classes. Because that's what I was suspecting, that Czech teachers probably are using this. And then I love this idea of a class journal in groups. That sounds excellent. Very cool. Okay, anyone else? I see in the chat there's a comment about writing a script of a small sketch. That sounds really interesting. Excellent. And any last thoughts? We will, I think, go ahead and move on. Although thank you for sharing. That was great. I'm going to share my screen. One moment. Hold on. I see. Technology. Okay. So you should be able to see my screen now. And it should look like this. Can everyone see? Okay, great. So we talked about this, some ideas for next year, and I definitely understand burnout is real. So these might be some things you come back to at the end of the summer, at the end of the break, to think about. But looking ahead, why even use fiction in the classroom? I'm sure we can all think of many reasons. I thought of a few that I'll share. You know, storytelling can transport us. It can take us to different places. Stories can attempt to have a moral message, you know, to change the way we treat one another or perceive the world. But in my view, they don't have to have a moral. They can simply be artistic. They can have an aesthetic meaning. They can change the way we think about language itself. Okay, so, or at times they can do both of these things. So these are some of the reasons that I personally love fiction and think it can be really useful. I'm gonna now quickly share an activity that is quite simple, but you can use it as an opener or as part of a lesson. Some of you may have done this before. It's similar to the game of telephone, where you're whispering a sentence down a line of people and the sentence is slowly changing. Here you are writing sentences. So what you will do is your students will need to be in rows, and you will give some sentence starters, some already composed sentences to the person who's in the front of the row. And if they are more advanced, they can write their own sentence, but I suggest printing some out in case they don't have an idea right away. You can simply go online, go to a website, print out some opening sentences, cut them out, and I like to have just a bag where the student can reach in and grab one. So if they're at the front of the row, they will take this sentence, add to it a couple sentences, one or two, and then pass this to the person behind them. That person will then add a few sentences of their own, and you keep going until everyone has contributed to the story. This was really fun. We tried it in the gymnasium where I was teaching in Podjebrady and also in a gymnasium in Jędrzejów Hradec. And both times it was really successful. The students have a lot of fun, and there was a common theme of, you know, random murders or crimes happening because, you know, it's fun to put in something kind of crazy. We also had a lot of cats in our stories. So anything can happen with this activity. And yes, here you have the instructions. It should be fairly straightforward. Now, if you're working with more advanced students and you want to, say, edit these stories after they've been completed, one thing you can do is work on removing what I call to be verbs. And these, the most common ones are was and is. And there's nothing wrong with these verbs. It's usually the most direct way to communicate information is to use these more passive verbs. They're very direct. But if you want to have more vibrant writing, you can attempt to replace these verbs with more active verbs. So in this example in the PowerPoint, you can see the writer has replaced was driving with raced down the road. It's a more active verb. So the writing has automatically become more vivid. And this can be really can dramatically change the quality of student work because they start to play with a wider variety of verbs. So this is something you can do as a second step if you want to edit the writing after this activity. Okay. Moving on. Now, another activity to get students kind of prepared to do maybe a unit or a few lessons on creative writing is to simply have them keep journals, which have already been mentioned. Martina mentioned keeping this class journal. I really do recommend this, and I kind of think of it as an observation journal. You might have students try to write down every day 2 or 3 things that they notice about the world around them. You can model this for them as being really simple. Like, I'm looking out my window now and I see clothing on a clothesline, including a pair of really sparkly red pants. Okay, that's weird and interesting. So this is something I can write down in my journal. I also see an inflated swimming pool that has water in it. It's quite dirty, so maybe the water has been sitting there for a long time. No one's using this pool. I simply write this down. It's a random observation, but it starts to create this practice of observing the world in having greater attention. And students can also write down dialogue, things they overhear on the bus, things their parents say that annoy them, things their friends say. It can really be anything, but I recommend this just to start preparing for creative writing. Okay. Any questions at this point? We'll move on. Now, there's a big fear with fiction that you have to just make things up from your imagination. And I really disagree with this. I think you can use things from your own life. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see this kind of chart with different elements of fiction, characters, setting, plot. Of course, if you have students who are really imaginative, maybe they can make up a character from nothing. But if that feels too much for them, they can just have the character be themselves or their friend, okay? It can be someone real, that's okay. Same with setting. It can be their school or your town. Plot, it can be something that they're going through. And the theme can also be something that's really true to life for them in this moment. So I think reminding students that realistic fiction is fiction kind of help bring down that barrier and make it more accessible. And all the great writers did this. So this is a book I read in high school. It's really popular for high schoolers in the US to read books by famous writers like Faulkner and Hemingway. And this book is about basically Hemingway's best friends. And of course, they were all American expats living in Europe and going from different cafes and bars and having these wild adventures. And he basically just wrote about his friends in this book that became quite famous. So it's helpful to know that some of the most famous writers simply do the same. They write about the world that they know. Okay. Now, as promised, I wanted to talk a bit about the hero's journey. So what is the hero's journey? Does anyone know about this concept already? Yes, Gabriella.
I needed to unmute myself. Can you hear me now? Is it or not? Yes, you can. Okay. Jack Garver created a lesson plan on the hero's journey for us, and he had explained the generic arc of the stories, of the hero stories, and students really enjoyed it. And actually right now we are organizing a hero's journey writing competition, but the deadline is closing in and I'm not sure how many stories we are going to receive. We'll see. But students generally accepted it. For some it was too much, but I mean accepted really positively. We'll see. I think I will actually be able to let you know by Wednesday how many contributions we're going to have.
Thank you. That's great. Very, very cool. So I will look forward to hearing next week how that went. And it's definitely something that you can teach. I'm curious, actually, did he teach it in one lesson or over the course of a few lessons?
It was actually very quick, intensive. He only taught it in one lesson. He showed us a video, or students a video, with the clock. If you know what I mean, like which hour means what, which part of the journey. And then he explained it on Shrek, actually. Yeah. Shrek was our hero, so
perfect. Okay, really cool. Thank you for sharing. So yes, that was just wanted to ask about that because you can definitely do this in one lesson, but you could also do it over the course of a couple lessons. I think it really depends on you, but it can be done in one lesson. So I'll share a little bit about the hero's journey for those for whom it's new. At its most basic, it's just a plot line that valorizes the hero as they move through conflict. So this can be Shrek, it can be anyone. And it's basically a story form that's been used throughout time. A very common example is Odysseus in the Odyssey. Students will generally think of Harry Potter pretty quickly because Harry Potter is still a really beloved hero. Or movies from the Marvel universe, which I am less familiar with. So I have learned a lot about Marvel by just asking students about their favorite superheroes. So you can easily find online some of these charts that are shaped like a circle, like a clock, beginning with the hero's call to adventure and moving through these different stages. Now, don't worry if this looks complicated because you only need to focus on a few key points in the journey. So I'll share those. And quickly, some more examples could be Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, etc. So thinking about some of the most important points in the journey, the first key point would be the call to adventure. So in the Odyssey, this is when Odysseus leaves Ithaca. He's about to begin this journey. And of course, in Harry Potter, it's when Harry has been living in his family in the Muggle world with this family, and Hagrid comes, and everything changes when Hagrid arrives. So students will really recognize this. You can even find the clip on YouTube of Hagrid knocking on the door and showing up. And this is the moment where everything changes for a character. Another key point in this journey is going to be the trials and tribulations. This is the crossing the threshold moment. It's where the character can no longer go back to the way things were. So for Harry, it's once he's in the wizarding world, and Odysseus, once he's on his journey and I think a storm happens, there's no going back. He must go forward. What happens next is the character goes through a series of challenges. And so we call this tests, allies, and enemies. So for Harry, he makes his friends, Hermione and Ron, and Odysseus, he's going to be tested in these various ways, and he's going to have a guide. I think it's the goddess Athena, who is his friend or ally. And the last point, I think there are officially about 12 steps, like a clock, in the hero's journey, but I'm giving you just the main 3 or so key points. The final one would be the atonement or the return. It's also called the resurrection, where the hero has been brought to the verge of death. Some horrible battle has happened. Odysseus has to go to the underworld. He's unsure if he's going to even make it out, but in the end, they survive. So how do you communicate this to students? Well, as my colleague, the American ETA Jack Garver did, there are some amazing videos on YouTube. If this feels like a lot to talk about, I would really suggest using a YouTube video. You could find one on Harry Potter, but there's a number of others out there that explain this really well. And in an engaging way, the students will know the character. I also suggest having a class discussion before you tell them anything. So I would actually open with a class discussion where you ask your students to simply generate a list of heroes and heroines that they can think of. This is really open-ended, but you can find out which characters they already know about. And you can discuss the type of major conflicts that are repeated in stories over time. So as you can see on the PowerPoint, you have, I think there's about, in fiction writing, 6 different types of conflict. So you have man versus man, man versus nature, man versus society, man versus technology, or if you're writing fantasy, you can do man versus the supernatural. When we did the writing workshop, some students were already really well versed in this. So, but this is a more advanced concept, so it depends on what level your students are at. Any questions? I see things in the chat. This is okay. I found online a wonderful resource called Storyboard That, and they have these really lovely cartoons that show different examples of conflict. So this is character versus character, and this one is character versus nature. Okay, so once you've had a group discussion about different heroes, you've probably shown a YouTube video describing the hero's journey. I would then do one of 2 things. If you're working with really advanced students who just want to create and they're ready to go, you can simply give them a worksheet similar to this one, and they can start plugging in ideas about a made-up character that they can create. So this is best done as group work. They can imagine a character, if this character will have superpowers, where they will live, and what kind of conflicts they're going to face. That's at a really advanced level. If you have students who need more scaffolding, I would suggest narrowing it and giving this activity more structure. So I came up with a slightly more basic activity based on Hero's Journey, which I will share. And it's basic, it's an island, stuck on an island experience. So before you tell the students that they're going to be stuck on an island, have them fill out a basic form like this. Don't tell them they will be stuck on an island with these people. Simply ask them to make a list of people. Also make a list of some random objects, but no phones, because then they could call for help. And then the challenge is to think of the worst superpower, because if you say the best superpower, most students will say fly, and then they can just fly off the island, and it defeats the purpose of the activity. So they might think of a mediocre superpower, and this will make things more interesting. The next step is to give students a time to really draw and just be creative and have fun making a big map of their island. So they can think about different features of this place, different animals, plants, etc. And it can be based on a real place. Like some students might have had the opportunity to travel, others will not. And so it can be from what they imagine an island is like. They can Google island images if they need inspiration, things like that. And then finally, you tell them that they are in fact stranded on this island. They only have the objects they previously brainstormed, and one of their 3 people that they're with has this superpower. So now comes a writing exercise where as a group, they can write at least a few paragraphs, detailing, I would say, 3 days on this island. What will they do each day? How will they survive? And the more, someone asked about grading last time. I would grade based on the level of detail and effort that they put in. So just say it should be 2 paragraphs, the more detail, the better. And this is to really So that's, oh, okay. Any questions? Okay, so moving on to one other thing, I wanted to offer this as an alternative to the hero's journey because it's very male centric, and most of the heroes that are mentioned, if you do Google this or do research, are going to be men, and it can be kind of limiting. So there are other ways to think about this. This photo on the left is a picture of the American writer Ursula Le Guin. And she was a fantastic science fiction and fantasy writer, actually from my home state, from Oregon. And she came up with a different theory of fiction. Instead of this hero's journey, which is really linear, right? There's a climax, there's a conflict. She came up with a different theory called the carrier bag theory of fiction. And this image is of a bag. And her idea is that fiction it doesn't have to be about conflict. Rather, it can be about the different things that we bring into our lives. So that's the idea of the bag, like all the things and people we meet along the way, we put them in this bag, and that's what creates story. So it resists this clarity and this linearity of the hero's quest. And she has a wonderful quote saying conflict is just one kind of behavior. There can be other ways to relate in human life: finding, losing, bearing, discovering, parting, changing. Change, rather than conflict, is the universal aspect of story. So her theory is that story doesn't have to be violent, it doesn't have to have superheroes, but it does have to involve change. So I really just want to offer this as an alternative way to teach storytelling. I think both are really useful, and it depends on the students that you have and the kind of discussion you want to have. But both are good. Okay, so
can I ask something?
Yes, please.
During your teaching workshops in the Czech Republic, have you tried both of these approaches or just the first one? And what were the results?
Well, we only really did the hero's journey, but I had some discussions with students later about Ursula Le Guin, about the carrier bag theory of fiction, and these students were more advanced, so they were more open-ended discussions, and that was great. Okay, so how will this benefit students? Well, writing fiction is going to help them practice all sorts of different writing concepts: setting, character, plot. It's going to help them think logically and structurally. Again, to Christina's question just now, I think the reason the hero's journey is still dominant in how we teach fiction is because it's really structural. So it's almost like it's easier if you're just beginning with fiction to learn it this way and then to move to something different later on, in my opinion. Sharing public speaking. What we had students do after they created their own hero's journey with a character they made up is that they shared in groups. And this was really powerful because each group had a very different character, a very different world. And fiction always forces us to consider our own lives. Okay, I promised we have about 15 more minutes. So I promised to answer a few questions about how to warm up a classroom with shy students. I have a wonderful activity related to characters and writing, which I actually learned from a colleague in Podjebadi, which is this movie or cartoon swapping exercise. It's very simple. You simply have half the class leave the room, the other half remains in the room. The students that remain watch a clip. It can be something from a known movie, but it works better if it's a cartoon from an animated film or something that's not recognizable. So this is a situation where you don't want to use Harry Potter. You want to use something that's more random that people won't know right away. And it should be very short, like 60 seconds of a clip. And then the other students will come back into the room, and the group that remained will need to describe to them exactly what they saw. So it's going to work best if when they're watching, they take notes and they try to write what they saw first, and then they can read to their partner from those notes. So it involves both reading and sharing. And this is a pretty quick activity and everyone is involved. So it's just a good way to work with quieter students because everyone's going to be doing something. Another simple way is just to do some reading and have everyone in the room share their favorite part to see who has the same favorite part. And I also really like to do when students read work that they wrote, I ask the listeners, the other students, to write down a favorite phrase or word that they hear. Then you can go around in the room and have everyone else just say that word or phrase. So this is to create active listening and to have the student who was vulnerable enough to share their work really feel heard, and to also for them to hear back what the best part was or what caught people's attention. Another thing you can do is put a photo on the screen, share a photo with students, and have them write a scene from that. Have them invent something based on the photo. So this works best if it shows two people interacting and the students have to create some dialogue or create a scene. What do they think is happening in this moment? And finally, related to Ursula Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction, if you want to be very vulnerable, you could dump out whatever handbag or briefcase or bag that you bring to school. You could dump it out on your desk, show them some of the items inside, and have students write a bit about what they think your day, what they think your personality or life is like based on what is in your bag. This can be especially fun if you put in some items the night before that are maybe a little more unique to you. I'm looking at my desk now. For example, I have a shell, or I have this fancy coffee maker. So you can put some special items in advance in your bag for this activity. Okay. I also said I would address what to do when students say, I'm just not creative, or I can't think of anything. Really remind students that creativity doesn't come from thin air. I have this quote, and I don't even know who said it. I don't know if it was Picasso or Banksy. It's attributed to hundreds of artists, but the bad artists imitate and the great artists steal. You can share this with students. Of course, have serious discussions about plagiarism. We don't want that. But the idea rather is that it's okay to read something and say, I want my writing to sound like that. How can I get there? Quite literally, you can do work with imitation. So imitation means taking a paragraph from a short story. Maybe it is from Hemingway. And Hemingway is famous for these very short, very direct sentences. So he has kind of a style that's very strong. You can take a short paragraph of Hemingway, remove all the words except for the linking words, the articles, and conjunctions. So keep only the words that matter for grammatical reasons. Then provide your students with a topic or a few choices, and they will simply fill in the spaces that you have created by removing the words. So this takes some work. I spent I spent some time online searching for ready-made templates of this kind of activity, but it's my opinion that it works best if you create it yourself. So it is a bit of a time-consuming activity. But it does show students how to imitate without copying, right? Because you're removing 85% of the words, and that's really key to not plagiarize, but to imitate the style. You need to remove almost everything. And finally, I wanted to share a few examples of American novels that you could teach if you have more time to devote to this. Many of my students were reading this book, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. So I started reading it, and it's wonderful. It's about two friends, and I would say it's for advanced readers, but it is doable. And another novel I recommend is A Place for Us. I haven't read this one, but it's been recommended to me. It's about a Muslim girl who's growing up in America and some of the challenges she faces. So again, it's the hero's journey in a novel form, and it's a young person. Both these books are about young people, so they're age appropriate 15-year-old characters. And then one thing to do, if this seems too advanced, I found this wonderful book called The Arrival by Sean Tan. He's actually, I believe, an Australian author. This book is about migration and immigration, but it is entirely with pictures. There are no words. So this made me think, this is an excerpt from that book. And how wonderful would it be to either use this book or something like it to show a series of pictures and have students write captions, right? What is happening in this scene? What is this character doing? And you could use this book, or you could use something like a comic book and removing the captions and having students write their own. And finally, I think this is my last slide, but last time we talked about giving marks for creative writing. Someone had a question. I found this rubric. It's from a Oregon public school website, and they were also teaching the hero's journey. 6 is the highest score you can get in this rubric, and you will see that they want clear, focused, and interested ideas that are well developed and thought out. When you're moving down to maybe 3, it's the reader can understand the main ideas, but they may be too simple. Main ideas lack details. And then when you move down to 1, the writing lacks a central idea or purpose. So I think the two main things for grading are, when you're doing creative writing, try not to focus on the grammar and try to focus on the ideas and also the details. Are they able to add details and take the time to do that? And that's my recommendation for grading. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I have been talking a lot. Any questions on some of this, or does anyone want me to return to a certain slide? For my knowledge, do these activities seem too hard for your students, too easy, in the right place? What would you say?
Celeste, maybe if you could stop sharing so that we see more people on the screen. Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, I do have a question.
Yes.
I don't know if they're appropriate because I haven't tried any of them, but it was mentioned that it's good to practice or try writing in groups. And I would like to ask, how does this really work? You know, is it like in a group, each person writes a sentence? How does it work?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It really depends on the activity. If you're doing the very first activity I shared, for example, passing the sentences behind, in that activity, each student is individually writing one or two sentences. They physically pass the paper, and the next student individually adds to it. And then the fun part is at the very end, the last student reads the whole thing. Now, if you're doing something a little more time intensive or complex, like you've given them a worksheet for filling in the hero's journey. So they are coming in, they're in a group coming up with a character, and they're going to write who are the characters' enemies, where is the setting, where is it taking place. They're going to write down all these details. I would suggest that the students discuss all this first, and then try to have everyone writing a little bit. So I would try to tell them, don't push the job of the actual writing to one person in the group. Try to have everyone contributing, but this can be hard if it's a mixed ability group and the strongest writer just wants to do it. So in that case, you can try doing a few different activities throughout the year and mixing up the groups. It's a really good question. Does anyone have feedback for that? Thank you. Gabriella, maybe when you did Hero's Journey with Jack, did students, how did they actually write the stories, individually or as groups?
Yeah, they wrote it, actually, this was in pairs, but and as far as I could see, so they were really, one of them was writing, the other was contributing with ideas, and they swapped a bit and so on. But myself, I did try collaborative writing a couple of times, and one was, as you suggested, describing the photographs. So I have, whenever I see something really crazy, some crazy picture in magazine or so on, so I like to cut it out, and then I try to so if I may describe it for a second. So the steps are that first a group writes only, for example, just nouns or just verbs or nouns and adjectives about that picture on a piece of paper. Then this piece of paper is passed to another group where they try to, without actually seeing, that's important, I forgot to mention. So without seeing the picture, so then they try to come up with a story of what might have happened before the picture was taken or after, and what, based on what the group, what the earlier group has written down, and then they compare the pictures and the stories. It was fun. It was just interesting activity, very creative. The stories were not too large, maybe 150 words. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you. And 150 words is plenty. That's very successful. Yes. Does that help, Marcella, a bit?
Yeah, I myself personally feel like it's a good idea to do some brainstorming, putting some words together in a group, and then having the students to write their own things, in their own way. And I don't know, but yeah. And we do have mixed ability classes, so that's
yes. And I think that's absolutely a good solution, and one that I use during the year as well, that they can brainstorm together and then eventually work by themselves or in pairs. I think that's very, very good and will be successful. I think Martina had a question.
sorry, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to say what was already said or has been said, that I usually leave it up to them if they want to write individually or in groups or in pairs. And because some of them are strong individuals who want to write something themselves, and that's it. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions? I was curious about the level because we'll have 2 more sessions. So if there's something I can bring that's at a more beginning level or even more advanced, do let me know. And next time we will work on narrative nonfiction, which I really enjoy.
So could a couple of people maybe share whether the level today was about appropriate or whether you would prefer something a little bit more advanced or more for your beginners?
If I just make quickly, for me, it's perfectly appropriate. Our students are some around B2, C1, so that would be perfect. I do not teach any weaker students. But...
Okay, so thank you all so much. I think that will be it for today, but I really hope to see everyone on Monday. It's at 3 p.m. and we'll talk about nonfiction writing.
Thank you very much. And as last time, please, can you give us feedback? Can you give Celeste feedback on how well the lesson was planned and delivered today? Thank you very much.
Thank
Perfect.
you. Thank you.
So we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good